just to start us off, Press, could you just explain to us a little bit, like the title Swagger, the title of your book? What are you kind of referring to and getting at with that name and that term? What's that all about?
So um, the way that the kind of the logic of a book is that you want someone to see the book, and you want the book to compel them to pick it up. And so the way that happens is by the cover design. And second of all, then you want a title that reaches up and grabs them. So the word swagger is not a word that you hear much. I think the last person that I heard actually use the word was President Bush, George W. Bush. And he said, some people say that I swagger, but in Texas, this is just how we walk. So, so it's not a common word, but I like the word because it's one of those words that sounds like what it is. It sounds like its definition. So it tells you what it is just by the sound of it. The book originally had another title. It was the title of it was Launch, and I don't remember what the subtitle was now. But as word came back to me from my advanced readers, I realized that that was not a good title. But one of the things that came back from those advanced readers was that the chapter that is titled Swagger really seemed to resonate with a number of the readers, and that drew my attention to the word. And I thought, that might be my title. So I lived with it for a little while, tested it on a few people. The chapter, I believe, is a powerful chapter because it and I, kind of struggle with it a little bit because I thought, well, maybe, it's a powerful chapter because I know the people that I'm writing about, and it was a powerful story in my life and my friend's life and that sort of thing. But anyway, I then bounced it off of a few people and believed that it worked. So to continue, and so I've answered your question, but let me finish my earlier thought. So once a book compels you to pick it up, then the way this works is that a person will, I should also tell you, no, I'll come back, I'll leave that to later. So a person picks it up, and then the next thing that people typically do is they flip it over and look and read the back. And if they like the back, then they open the book to the table of contents, and they typically then look at the table of contents, and they will look at the last chapter and see if that compels them. And if it does, then you've made the sale, and they'll buy your book. It's a little bit different now that we're talking about, online bookstores, and bookstores don't really exist anymore and those sorts of things. So what I was going to tell you is, when I renamed the book Swagger, I was a little bit concerned because it's a masculine sounding kind of a word. And then the people that designed the cover for the book sent this to me, and I was concerned because it's obviously a male figure on the front of the book. And I thought, well, that's going to type the book, and women won't pick the book up. For example, this is a work of fiction here, No Mercy, and it starts out with a story about two brothers, Hank and Vassar, who are going on a fishing trip. And I've heard from a number of women who put the book down because they did not want to read a book about fishing. And that's just that's just the entry point into the book. So anyway, I was concerned about, the fact that this is a masculine figure. And so I had access then to, three or four, I don't know, half a dozen young adult women. And so I just showed them the cover of the book and said, if you saw this cover, would you pick this book up and read it? Or are you turned off by the male figure? And they looked at this book, and to the person, they all said, no, that looks like James Bond. And so I thought, oh, well, sure, I'm glad I thought of that. Isn't that a great story, though? I think it looks like James Bond. So and my sister-in-law also thinks like I look like Daniel Craig, but my sister-in-law is demented, so that probably doesn't count. All right, end of answer. Yeah.
Awesome. It does kind of look like James Bond.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who better than James Bond to teach you how to walk through life?
Yeah, really.
All right. Whoever, there's some questions out there, I reckon. Let's see. Who shall be the first one? Go ahead and unmute yourself if you dare. Or put it in the chat and I'll read it out loud.
Not possible that I've answered everybody's question because nobody's asked me one yet. No.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. I think it's a pretty simple question, but since you were talking about swagger and you renamed it because of the chapter, obviously you think it's a pretty big chapter. Do you have a favorite chapter? I know it's just a kind of a base level question, but do you have a favorite chapter, like one that's like personally you like the most?
Yeah. That's a great question. I don't know that I do. I really am. Well, yeah, I do, Will. I'm really taken with the chapter called Cause and Effect. And I like the chapter, but the part of the chapter that I really like the most is the footnote at the end, or it's on the last page of the chapter. And it's a footnote that talks about Thomas Aquinas. This is page 80 if you've got a book. It talks about Thomas Aquinas and how he thought through the existence of God. And boy, one of these days, when I make my exit from this place, I am going to hunt down Thomas Aquinas and have a visit with him. The chapter Distinct versus Separate, the more that I think about that chapter and the more that I watch the world unfold and how people think and so forth, I think that's one of the more crucial chapters in the book. But probably in answer to your question, Will, the chapter that probably has the deepest meaning for me is the chapter titled Good. And the reason that it probably is the most meaningful chapter to me is because the goodness of God is something that I have really struggled with personally. I've certainly known that God is good because that is the correct answer to the question when you go to Sunday school or hear someone speaking about theological things. But in my heart, in the deepest recesses of me, I believed that God was good, but I believed more accurately that he was good to you. I did not believe that he was going to be good to me. And so I really have struggled with that. In fact, a friend of mine, a good friend of mine, Matthew, he and I had gone down to Magnolia Street here a number of months ago now. We were having a drink together, and he's a good friend, a trusted guy, and I told him I'm struggling with the goodness of God. And he looked at me and he said, well, what part of God is good in the Bible don't you believe? And, you know, he shut me down, and it hurt my feelings. And I didn't quite know how to resolve all that. But God, in his goodness and in his divine humility, he would not let me alone on this. And he came to me in other terms, rather than, you know, so this is in the Bible, let me help you think this through from another angle. And I was totally not suspecting to read about goodness coming out of the mind of Plato. But I stumbled across his work, actually reading Thomas Cahill's book, and it was the trigger. It broke the dam, and I understood what Plato was saying to me, and I understood the goodness of God from that angle, if you will, and so tonight I have a very different conviction and belief about God's goodness to me personally than I had a year ago. So that's probably my favorite chapter.
Hey, Chris.
Hey.
You know, I was looking through the book this afternoon, and it became obvious really from the beginning, especially when you're talking about books and folks, and then it's relative about truth, and then dates, and then the Bible, and then reading the Bible, that you were strategic about how you arranged all of those chapters. And will you kind of address what was going on and your strategy there and why you did that?
Well, I mean, the simple answer, Brent, is that I want people to read my book, and then I want them to like the book, you know, get something from it and tell other people about the book. But you know, I mean, I did sit down and let me back up a step. So I, you know, kind of the way the secret sauce gets made here in my study is I kind of brainstormed, you know, what's in my head here? What are the things that have been roaming around inside my head for these 40 years? And which of those things rises to the level of maybe making it into a book? And so I brainstormed those things. There were no wrong answers for a while until I finished that. And then I went back and kind of edited those ideas. Then I wrote them in kind of a self-contained manner. So in other words, I did not have a cohesive kind of a line of organization to the table of contents. So I wrote each of the chapters, and then once I had drafted them in a really raw draft, so a first draft kind of a concept, then I went back and looked for the themes in those chapters and moved them from what I think of as simple or the most concrete. So who am I? And then to some of the more complex concepts and more challenging concepts that I believe a person struggles with, and that in particular a young adult would struggle with. So for example, I feel like probably, what you do as a young adult, what you do with an old person is probably not as straightforward an answer for you as it was for me when I was your age. And so that's one of the more complex ideas, I believe, for you to have to think through. But then by far the most complex of the ideas, then is the idea of who am I at the beginning of this book, and then where has the author moved me to at the end of the book, and how have I changed? And ultimately, then the question is, so I have changed now that the book is complete. Excuse me. Do I believe that? Do I believe where the author has moved me is a place where I wish to live and live differently? Am I changed by the book, and am I happy with that, and will I embrace it? So that's kind of the logic of what was going on with this particular book. There were some chapters that the idea in the chapter was dependent somewhat, or could be expanded on by an earlier chapter, and so those chapters obviously needed to follow the initial introduction of the idea.
I've got a texted question, so I'm going to read that for you. If you were talking to someone about your book in one sentence, how would you describe it or summarize it?
So what's my elevator speech, right? Yeah. or as one of my board members used to say, what's my watermelon talk? Swagger is a book about life and thought and belief. Next question.
So, Press, I have yet to read the book.
Oh man!
I've read No Mercy, and I have plans to read Battle of the Round Tower soon, as well as Swagger.
You're a good man.
You said that you had written previous nonfiction works before.
Yeah.
And I've heard Swagger be called a book of essays.
Yeah.
So how exactly is Swagger different than your other nonfiction works? What's the biggest difference?
I've not written critically, which is what I think these essays are. I've not written real critically before, and that is a new voice for me as a writer. And I don't have anything quite like that that I've done. So the first book that I wrote, is a book called Things Only Men Know. And so the story on this is that this book was published by Harvest House Publishers out in Oregon. So I had flown to Oregon and was visiting with the publishing team there and everything. And they came up with this title. And so I kind of liked it. And I called back to the office, and I got my director of operations on the phone, a lovely woman named Marcy. And so my intent was to kind of do a little bit of a focus group using my staff and ask them for their reaction to that title. And so I got Marcy on the phone, and I said, so Marcy, they're proposing to name the book Things Only Men Know. And she said, oh, it's going to be a short book. So anyway, so that's the story on that book. And this book needs to be rewritten. So that's on my to-do list. And then I don't know if this was the next book or not, but then there was a book called Grace in Ungracious Places. It's actually a trilogy. And the story on this book is it was well received and everything, but just as it came out, the publisher, which was Revell, acquired Bethany House, and this book got lost in the acquisition. And so anyway, it is on, the other two books are, since they're a trilogy, they're already written and ready to be published. It's just the timing of all that. So anyway, that's next up. Then I don't have these other books. I don't know why. Anyway, there are a number of other books that I was an editor and a writer on and so forth. My dad and I partnered on a book called Lifetime Guarantee, for example. This book that I showed you earlier, No Mercy, that is it's a work of fiction. It was my first effort at fiction, and it is the battle between the flesh and the spirit. And so what this book does is I break apart all of the key players in the battle between flesh and spirit. So like the Trinity, I break the Trinity apart. God is a character, Jesus is a character, Holy Spirit's a character, and then the same on the dark side. So Satan is a character, and the law of sin is a character, and so on it goes. And then I've got my protagonist, the main guy named Hank. And then I actually use some what's called allegory, in that I personify temptation, for example. So one of the temptations that Hank struggles with is that he doesn't feel significant. Which is one of those essential things that we've got to have as human beings. So in other words, if you don't have that, it's like a three-legged stool with a leg missing. You got to go find that. You got to go get that fixed. And so that temptation, then I personify in a woman named Significance. And so by interacting then with temptation, you can hear how temptation sounds. You can see the strategy behind it. You can get into the mind, or at least I intend for you to get into the mind of Significance and understand what's going on in her and why she would plan to approach Hank the way she does. And then I show how these various characters interact with him, because a picture is worth 1,000 words. And the battle between flesh and spirit is one of the more challenging ideas in the Bible. And I think it's challenging, one, because it's difficult to know yourself. I mean, Shakespeare quoted the inscriptions at the top of the temple at Adelphi, and that which says, know thyself. And it's generally considered that's the most difficult thing in the world to do. And so what are my temptations, and how do those work, and what are the dynamics behind it, and et cetera? And while I can lecture on that and draw pictures about it, and some of you guys who've been with me when I've lectured here or there or whatever, you've seen me draw these pictures and so forth, but I wanted to actually paint a picture, a word picture. And so that's what that book is about. Then the sequel to that is Battle for the Round Tower. And what this book is it is an effort to explore whether or not God is good. It is an effort to explore whether or not the things that Hank learned in the first book are fully implemented into his life, and whether or not they are also replicable in somebody else's life. Can you tell someone what God has done in your life in a way that is meaningful enough that they will say, aha, and be able to take that aboard for themselves? I wanted to explore that. I also wanted to explore whether or not I could create a circumstance that was so grave and so dark and so difficult and so compromising that not even God could get a person out of that. And I won't tell you whether that works out or not, because you haven't read the book yet. But anyway, that's part of what I was trying to do in that book. And then I will return to I'll return to fiction here before long. The spiritual warfare book that I'm working on now, I'm not far enough along into that to know kind of what form it's going to take, but it will be nonfiction to begin with. But then I'll return to the No Mercy series, and probably will implement the tool of fiction to show more of what my latest, what the trend in my thoughts are about spiritual warfare.
I have a question. So I guess my question is, so you said like this book you were like contemplating writing it for the last like 4 years. So I guess a lot of people, like, they have dreams and they have a vision for what they want to do. And so my question is, like, what was it that like pushed you to really do it, like to actually commit and sit down and write the book?
Speaking of Swagger in particular, Maggie?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was the loyalty and love that I have for these 7 people that are named on the dedication page. Love and serve mankind, be instruments of peace, walk with God, be innocent as a dove, be shrewd like a serpent. Now, go into the world, Ada, Caden, Carson, Jackson, Liam, Maya, and P squared. I believe in each of you and love you like my own. So I sat down to write because it was in my heart to do it, but I wanted to give these people the best that I could give them. And I'm a poor man, and I don't have money, and I don't have possessions, many, but I do have treasures in my heart, and I wanted to give them those. I wanted to give them things that were the best from myself, and knowing that a book is not something that happens by Tuesday, I knew that I needed to get after it. And so I made my decision over the Christmas holidays a year ago, and once I got clear of all of the New Year mania, then I sat down and wrote the first draft of this book then in about 3 weeks. So that was the driving force on this, Maggie. To expand that answer a little bit, and forgive me for being tearful about that dedication, you can see that I'm very, I'm very sincere when I talk about these people. And but the other thing too is that over time I discovered that I am a writer, that's the part of how God has wired me together. And once I embraced that that's kind of how God had pieced me together, and I did not know that until much later in my life, but once I kind of figured that out and embraced it, then it is something that at this point, I don't decide to write. It's just what I do. And So I just, on a normal day, I don't think about it. It's just what I do.
So I have a question, Press.
Yes, sir.
So I really want to start writing some, and for people that want to really start writing and thinking about that, what type of advice would you give?
Hold on. So, you know how long it's going to take me to put all this stuff away? I would do these things. First of all, I would go get this book and read it. I'm curious now. When I look at that on my screen, it's backwards. Is it backwards for you? You can read it? Okay. So this is a book by William Zinser, and Zinser, On Writing Well. And Mr. Zinser does a great job of articulating the craft. This is how you do this. So, for example, one of the rules that I learned from Mr. Zinser was that let me back up a step. One of the rules that I learned from him is that writing is primarily rewriting. So No Mercy, I rewrote this book about 4 times before it was before it was ready for advanced readers to even see it. So when you look at this and say, oh, wow, this book is 330 pages long. No, it's not. It's 1,000 pages to write, or no, it's more than that. It's 1,200 pages because I rewrote it 4 times before it was even ready to be edited, if you will. So first of all, Mr. Zinser then says that he taught me that writing is really about rewriting. The reason that's important is because it makes it okay for the first draft to not be the finished product. In other words, it's an unreasonable goal. It's an unreasonable goal to believe that I could sit down and write a first draft and for it to also be my final draft. So I was free then to embrace the idea that writing is also editing. He also taught me that when I come to write, if you know, today is a writing day, the only person that can show up for work is the writer. If it's an editing day, then the only person that can come to work is the editor. Those 2 people don't come to work on the same day. Now I'm, you know, both of those people live inside my head, but they're two different people. And Brent, you always surmised that I was schizoid. Now you have it on my own testimony. I don't let those 2 people show up for the same one, because the writer, that's a creative person, and it's a sensitive, vulnerable person. In fact, and I'll tell you more about this book, but this is, there you go. So this is the War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, and he talks about the battle, the tension the mindset that must be present in order for that creativity to come out. As he says, he's a Greek historian, actually an ancient Greek historian, and he believes that when he sits down and prepares himself, and he talks about how he does that, then it invites the muse. So there were 7 muses, and it invites his muse to come to him and speak to him as he writes. So in other words, he's talking about something that's very personal and very, very deep and so forth, and also very tender. So, for example, in Battle for the Round Tower, there's one of my characters that I created and that I really love dies in the book. I didn't see it coming, but I didn't know it at the beginning of it, but I saw it coming as the story unfolded. Well, when the death actually occurs, it's as though my fingers are creating something sacred and tender. And when this person actually passes away, I wrote the final word and placed the period, and then I shut the lid on the computer and I left to go walk in the neighborhood, because there was a grief inside me at what had transpired. So the point is, the writer is a creative, sensitive, tender kind of a soul. The editor, on the other hand, is a rational, by the book, concrete, black and white. It's right or it's wrong. I need to make a judgment call on this. When I'm done with this piece of paper, it's going to look like a massacre has happened. It's going to bleed red. And so that is a calculated kind of I'm no respecter of a person. There is nothing sacred for me except the voice of the author. If the page must bleed red, it must bleed red, because that will only serve to make this better. Well, obviously, you need both of these people, but if they show up to work on the same day, the creative person will go away. And so like when I'm writing, one, I will write every day, and when I sit down in the morning, I will glance through, 1 or 2 paragraphs that were the last ones that I wrote. And if I see something obvious that I want to change, I will. In that sense, I'll edit. But once I've got the heartbeat of where I left off, then, I go for it. So I learned that from Mr. Zinsser. I also learned things like every word on the page must work hard and must work equally. So in other words, there is no room, nor is there any excuse for a weak word. Adverbs are weak words. Adverbs are words that end with ly. So completely. So if I said, I completely immersed myself in my work, you get the idea of what I'm saying. But if I say I immersed myself in my work, then you understand the depth and value and force of the word immersed. If I put completely in front of it, completely doesn't really serve any purposes, and it really detracts from the force of the word immerse. So I really steer clear of adverbs unless I'm writing dialogue. And I learned that from Mr. Zinsser. One of my advanced readers on No Mercy is actually the very first person that ever came to work for me, a brilliant woman named Kathy. And Kathy reads everything. She remembers what she reads. She reads a book a day. I mean, it's just, I don't know how she does that. But anyway, she speed reads for one thing. And so when she read my work, she came back to me. She paid me one of the highest compliments that anyone's ever given to me as a writer. And she said, Press, I speed read everything, but with your work, I have to read every single word. So it's a great compliment, because that means that, as Mr. Zinsser taught me, every word is working hard. I've got everything disorganized here. You're going to die when I tell you about this next book. This next book gave me the freedom to go inside myself and write what I see in an honest and unadulterated kind of a fashion. And in other words, how is the art made? So I have my tools, but how do I actually tap into the artist inside me? And here's the writer, Stephen King. And it's the same Stephen King that is the horror writer, okay? And the name of the book is On Writing. So Zinsser's book is On Writing Well. King's book is On Writing. And his illustrations are just as weird as you might suspect they would be. But how he does what he does is quite remarkable, and he conveys it. And then the challenge of writing, the art of writing, is back to Stephen Pressfield, The War of Art. You may have run across Pressfield's work. Boy, I'm drawn, just went blank here. Gates of Fire. Gates of Fire. So he wrote the definitive work on the Battle of Thermopylae, where the 300 Spartans faced off against the 1.2 million soldiers under Persian King Xerxes at Thermopylae. And he wrote the definitive work on that. There was a movie sort of made from it, 300. And so anyway, he's an ancient Greek historian, actually, but he's one of these guys that just, his mind's always going. And he's got some videos right now. You can find him at stephenpressfield.com. And he's doing some videos right now on the warrior archetype. And they're just fabulous. But anyway, he sat down and assessed why writing is hard and why the making of the art is hard, and wrote this book, and it's a magnificent book. So there's a whole shelf of books there on how you do what you do, but those are the three books that I would refer you to. Then the second thing that I would tell you is you must write. Writing is a skill. It's not something that you're born with. You develop this, and you work hard. It's a very, very hard and demanding job. So when people tell me, I think I've got a book in me, I think, well, we'll see. How many words have you written to this point? The way that I discovered that I was a writer, and the way that I developed the craft ultimately, was that I write a journal, and it was in the safety of that journal that I wrote and discovered that this was something that I had a talent for, and that I wanted to try to put a sharper edge on.
Well, those are some good nuggets. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I do have another text question here.
Mhm.
I can read that. Get ready for this one. All right, it says, the back of the book says, does swagger tell you what to think? No, swagger helps you think. I didn't find this to be true. It seemed you come away with from each chapter with an idea of what you wanted the reader to think. Could you clarify for me what you meant by swagger helps you think?
Yeah, great question, and I've wondered about that myself. When I wrote the back cover copy and put those words on the page there, I wondered, well, is that true? And I think it is. So here's why I think that's true. I want my reader to be in a different place when they finish the book, as I was saying earlier. So I intend to move my reader from point A to point B by the time they are finished with this book. I do not intend the book to have any formulas in it, and it doesn't. There's nothing that says do these three things and you will get this result necessarily. I mean, I say things like, in 5 years, you will be the product of the books that you read and the people that you hang out with. That is simply a truth. It's simply a fact. It's not me telling you what you must do, but rather just giving you a fact that you then must think through within the context of that chapter and decide then what you're going to do. The force of what I was trying to accomplish, though, the tightrope that I saw myself walking as I wrote, was it's kind of embedded in what's called learning theory. And I believe in some of my previous work, both speaking as well as in writing, that I have given people information and believed that they could take information, which was largely an abstract idea, and make it personal and applicable, which is a concrete idea. So I began to wonder about that and began to study the whole idea then of learning theory. In fact, hold on. One of the books that has really helped me on this is called Range, and it's by a guy named David Epstein. And what Epstein is saying, what he helped, the concept that he's helped me understand, is that people move and grow and embrace things. Number one, they do that most effectively in a general way. So in other words, our lives are not straight lines. You don't walk the straight and narrow per se to get where you're going. If you could chart your life, and so like when you get to be as old as I am, you can look backwards, and the trajectory of my life is not a straight line. It looks like a drunk driving down the highway like this, and that's because the way that you build resiliency in your life, and the way that you embrace and test and whatnot, is you test generally, and you move here and you move there and so forth. And so the people that tend to have the greatest skills at implementing new information are the people who have the greatest skills as general thinkers. And so the book then covers a lot of different subjects, but each of those subjects is addressed in kind of the same way. Let's think about this. So I'm showing you how I think, so that hopefully through the model of what I show you, you can get the hang of, okay, this is how this person thinks things through. Is there something of value for me to take away from that? And probably what the person asking the question is getting at is, not only then do you build resiliency by having general thought, so taking a sidestep, as you've gone in your college work and that sort of thing, you've changed your major 3 times, you dropped out for a semester, your summer jobs are, well, I was a camp counselor, and then I drove a truck for Amazon, and just there's all these disparate kinds of things. And the feeling is, well, I'm wasting my time, I'm wasting my money, etc. In the long range, no, you're not. That is the generalized exploration. And so, as a writer of something like this particular book, I wanted multiple ideas, because what I'm really after is I'm wanting you to learn how to think, and I'm wanting to show you how to do that. If you come away with a different conclusion or a different conviction about how you feel about abortion, or whether the Constitution of the United States is static or living, then that's fine. So in other words, I wanted to pick subjects that were important subjects, but what I'm really interested in is that you can come at any subject and think your way through it. The second thing I wanted to do, though, is metaphorically speaking, I wanted to hold your hand as a reader just a couple of more steps than I customarily would have, because learning theory is teaching me that I have probably stopped short in being an effective, in being as an effective teacher as I possibly can be. And so it's something of an experiment for me to say, can I, in literature, can I hold your hand a couple of further steps to where the leap from abstraction to concrete application is not as complex or overpowering. So not to throw anybody under the bus here, but see, what day of the week is this? This is Thursday. So think about your pastor's sermon last Sunday. What was the subject? What were the 3 points that he made? And what did you actually walk away with on Sunday that influenced your life such that on Thursday at 7 o'clock, you're living differently than you were on Sunday? And in all likelihood, you're saying, I don't really remember what he talked about. And I don't remember what the 3 things were. I remember I enjoyed it. The deal is, the studies indicate that by the time you leave the service, before you ever get to the parking lot, you will have lost about half of what your pastor said. And it's not just your pastor, but it would be your professor at college, or a business meeting at the office. So the question is, if you really want someone to take what you say or write aboard, what do you have to do to get that done? And so, yes, I drive my point about thought with strong opinion and strong words in this book. such that you understand, I hope, where I'm coming from. So there's no doubt about what um, uh, there's no doubt about how I have thought through the subject of good and what sources I've used, etc. And it's clear what you must do at the end of the chapter. That's not me telling you what to think. That's me showing you how to think about this subject, and then leaving you, hopefully, in a position where you can say, I understand what I need to think about now on that subject, and I can manage it. That makes sense? Yes or no?
It almost sounds like there's this kind of parallel to what you explained about the writing process and maybe what you're explaining about the thinking process as well, that you sort of, you know, take those thoughts and work on the puzzle a little bit, take the time to, I don't know if editing is the right word there or not, but
It is. It is. And so the deal is the way that you learn most effectively is you learn by going with me. In this case, so like there were a couple little Hispanic kids that used to live across the street at our other house, and their dad was an alcoholic, and it was bad, and so they basically lived at our house. When I drove in from work, they were in my garage, and they were perpetually having flat tires on their bicycles. And so I, slow thinking me, I repaired, I don't know how many bike tires before it finally dawned on me, you know what, I need to teach them how to do this. And so I announced that this was the new plan. Because obviously they weren't learning how to fix bike tires, or else I wouldn't have fixed 300 of them. They would have figured out how to do that themselves. So what I did then is I said, Raul, come here, I'm going to teach you how to do this. And so Raul then came over instinctively, and he, after we got the tube out of his tire and found the leak, then I took the tube over to the vise on my workbench and stretched the tube over the vise and twisted it there so that I could hold it. And I said, now, Raul, I want you to put your hand on mine. And he did that. And then he instinctively put his other hand up on top of my right hand. And so, and then, now that he's in between my arms, and, his little black head is right there in my face. I can't see what I'm doing, but, because his head of hair is right there in my face. But he had his hands on mine, and when I would give him a tool, he could feel the warmth of my body when he picked up that tool. And in other words, then, as he touched and walked with me and followed me, and I guided and so forth, then he got it. And that's the way we learn. So when Paul writes in Corinthians, I believe it is, and he says, be imitators of me as I am of Christ. The Greek word there for imitator is the Greek word from which we get our English word mimic. And so what he's saying to them is mimic what I do, because I am mimicking what I know of Christ. So come follow me, do as I do. The idea being that if you do as I do, and you get this, you inculcate it into your life, then at some point the wires are going to connect and you're going to say, I've got this. And at that point, then you are free then to go live that, but B, now you're in a position to pass this on to someone else. So obviously I can't do that with you. I've got to do that. I got to do that in these pages. And the way that I do that in these pages is one, I write with excellence, hopefully. And so you've got a good product, and you've got a tool here that's got a good sharp edge on it. And by the story that I give you, I bring you into myself. I pull you close, such that you walk with me for 200 and some pages here. You walk with me, and hopefully at the end of those 200 pages, you have been close enough to me that you have felt the warmth of my soul on the page, and that warmth you feel inside your soul, such that you say, okay, this is, I believe this, and it's something that I can do something with, and that I want to do something with. And I walk with this author for these 200 and some pages, and then when you close the book, you say, I've got it. I've got it. I'm different. I know what to go do now. I know how to live and think and believe because I've learned how to do this. So one of the guys that's reading the book, he's texting me on a regular basis, and I don't know him very well. And so, he and I see each other. We cross paths about once a year at my friend Victor's Ribathon, which he holds at one of the barbecue places here for his birthday. And so I see Danny at that Ribathon typically once a year, unless his band's playing, and then I'll go hear his band. But anyway, I see him once a year. But he's been texting me on a regular basis, and he texted me last week, and he said, I'm nearing the end of the book, and I don't want this to end. And so what he was saying to me is, you are taking me on a journey, and I'm moving, and it's a place that's taking me somewhere else. That's what I intend. And so I'm not telling you what to do. I'm taking you into myself long enough, holding your hand long enough, so to speak, that you're able to say, I've got this. I know how to live and think and believe.